Okay, guys, we're honing in on your zine and your final print project. So I just want to go over it with you before you hand it in. If you go to the home page and click on project, you get kind of the rundown of the zine, all the things that are required. These are really important. Look through all that, the size, and then at the end you can click on this project due, and that's where you're going to hand in your assignment. So I've given you pretty good instructions on how to walk through this. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to open the PDF that I've put on your assignment. In it, I've made comments on your layout that you sent me last week. And what I want you to do is I want you to open that within InDesign. You can actually open my comments within InDesign. It'll show you where they are and what I had to say about widows and spacing and everything. I didn't make you a video on how to use this because this video that I linked is everything you need to know. And this guy, Terry White, is a really good InDesign kind of spokesman. This is such an amazing new feature of InDesign. When I used to work for an in-house company, I would get multiple PDF comments on my work, and I'd have to go back and forth between the PDF and my document to make sure I made all the changes. But now you can do it within your InDesign document. So you're going to open that up, make any little changes, adjust that sort of thing first, and then you're going to finish your zine and get it ready to hand in. I want to talk to you about some of the things that are important on this. And the best way to do that is to go through the rubric. First, your chapter titles. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to show you all of this with my project, which is Alvin Lustig. So wherever your titles are, they need to be styled, meaning that they shouldn't just be a larger version or a bolder version of your other type. Maybe it's a different typeface, maybe it's all caps, maybe it's spaced out, but I want to see something that's different styling in at least 3 chapter titles. Your body copy needs to be 1,000 words and it needs to be easy to read. So as far as the count, you should by now have that figured out. If you don't, you can actually find that out within InDesign by going to Window, Info. And so this is going to tell me all the words in this block of copy. So now I've unlinked this copy, so it's only counting this much. But this is 252. This is 180. So if you have your text boxes unlinked, like I do, you'll have to just add up the numbers and make sure you have 1,000 words. And then for readability, just remember some of the things that we've talked about. You want to use a typeface that's between 9 and 12 point, depending on your type. You want to use leading that is 120 to 140% of the size. So if you see mine is 10 point with 14 point leading, so that's 140%. I could go down to 12, but I have enough room and I like it to look a little bit more open. Here's things that get in the way of readability for body copy. Number 1 is a stylized typeface that you got on DeFont or 1001. These heavy, chunky, ornate typefaces are good for subheads, but they're not good for body copy. You need a clean, easy to read typeface. Also, you don't want to overly track. I've seen some body copy that's overly tracked. This is at 0, which is fine for body copy. If you're trying to fix a break or something, you can put it -10, but basically you don't mess with tracking on body copy. We definitely don't want caps for body copy. If there's only a little bit of copy and it's part of the style, that's one thing. But do you see how hard it is to read? That's because there's not that up and down of eye movement that distinguishes the words, and so it's very difficult. It's also difficult to read when the leading's too tight. That's because things are running together and we can't read them well. So make sure that you follow those rules for the body copy. The other thing is that the overall design style works with the content, and that's really important. So I've given you some designers that have very distinct style. Each one of these, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, movie graphics, Cassandra, they have a very specific style in terms of color and typography. You don't want to just plop their work in a book and not somehow pay homage to that. So if you're searching for something, like let's say that I was going to do Paul Rand. So you want to look at these look at the colors of his work. look how everything is pretty flat and graphic. So you could do your book in very kind of clean graphics. Look at some of the type that he uses and some of the shapes, and try to figure out exactly what his style is. So that's what you're going to want to do for your booklet, right? You're not going to suddenly come in with a different kind of color scheme and something like that. And remember that a color scheme is actually really easy to come up with on Adobe Color. So I could just take a quick screenshot of this, go into Adobe Color, extract a theme, and there it is. Now I can add that to my library. I could even call it my Paul Rand colors, save that, and then I could pick another brighter version of that and save that too. So work with the colors, work with the typography. When you search for this person's work, there's one more thing that I want to make sure you understand. A lot of what you're seeing is their work, but some is not. Like, for example, this piece. There are a lot of people doing work about Paul Rand. So here's a book on Paul Rand. Here is another piece that someone has put together, but these aren't actually his works. You have to be really careful and find work that is his and not just something that's been put together to celebrate him. The same thing, like this is a good example. He definitely didn't do this. This is someone else's work. Someone did an illustration of Paul Rand. It's not his style. This wouldn't be a very good contribution to your book because this is somebody else's idea of who Paul Rand is. Whereas this photo of him is him, and you could use that and do something with it, and certainly his original artwork. You'll see it a lot with David Carson. He's the most imitated graphic designer ever. A lot of stuff that comes up is actually not his. So like this is a good example. That's just a bunch of stuff put onto a page. It's meant to look like David Carson, but it's not. Here's another one that also not David Carson. This is David Carson's work. The best thing you can do is when you read the website or article that goes with the piece of work. So don't just download images without seeing what it is first. Make sure you study their design, incorporate that into the overall look of the zine. Make sure your images are actual images from the designer, at least 6 of them, proportionately scaled and 200 plus PPI. By now you should not be disproportionately scaling anything, and all your images should be 200 PPI. That's the very minimum. Your front cover. So your front cover, for example, this is the one that I did for Alvin Lustig. And I had kind of a hard choice with him because some of his work is very kind of geometric like that, and then his book covers are a little bit more organic. But overall, in looking at his work, I saw more things that were like this. And then when I looked up his typography on Adobe Fonts, which is the first place you should go, I found that he had designed a typeface called Lustig. So I found that by doing some poking around. Be really keyed into the typography of your design period. So if you're doing, for example, punk rock flyers of the 70s, this is very, very type driven, and the type needs to have this kind of roughness, and you're likely to find something like this on DeFont. You can see here they use kind of the ransom letters, or they have this where it's dripping type misfits. Everything's just kind of crazy and different pieces. So that's extremely important. That's what maybe the cover of the book should be done in that. So key in on that for your cover. For mine, I grabbed some of the his typeface from Arts and Architecture, the lines. I thought that piece defined his work really well. He likes circles and squares and geometry, and he likes red, black, and white. This is his typeface, so I felt like it tied in with all the rest of the look. For the back cover, I just went with a solid version of the front. Don't put all new content on there as far as new pieces of work. The back is really just to kind of sum it up. When you export this, it needs to have trim marks and bleeds, and by now that should be no problem. You should have a really good grasp on that. So it looks like this. These lines cut into the background on every page, whether it has bleed or not. Also, minimal hyphenations and widows. And remember, when you're dealing with a lot of copy, it's best to kind of set that up in the body copy style sheet. In your body copy, make sure that, especially if you're using justification, that you minimize these settings so it's not too big of a span. You've got some glyph scaling. You could even do this 99 and 101. That will help a lot. And then also your hyphenations, make sure there's no more than 2 per paragraph. And I like words that have more letters in them to be hyphenated, so I have those settings also. But that's the best place to control something. However, once you finish, you really need to read your copy and make sure that there's not something that doesn't make sense. So for example, on this one, since there's not as much copy here, it might make sense not to break that paragraph. Might as well let it start there. Now they're almost even. So go through and read the copy, make sure there's nothing strange going on where it breaks. You certainly don't want to hyphenate someone's name or anything important like that. Image placement matches body copy. This is something else important that I'm seeing on some of the pieces that are starting to come through. In this one, I'm talking about his childhood. I couldn't find a childhood photo of Alvin Lustig, but this is the youngest one I found, and I feel like it kind of plays into it. And I used a graphic to kind of make the word creative stand out. This one, in this new visual language, is talking about typography and that he also was a furniture designer. So I had to find a piece of his furniture design to put there. So make sure you're reading the copy. If you're talking about logos, show logos. If you're talking about posters, show that. If you're talking about movie graphics, show that. Don't show a picture of the designer. And then legacy and impact. I thought this was a really thoughtful picture of him, so I put that on the back. I could put more graphics there, but I feel like I've covered it. Typography, furniture design, book design. Where you're putting images, it's adding more meaning to the body copy. Page numbers are easy. I want those on a top layer and on the master page so they always show up. And then let's talk about the wow factor. So there's a couple of things that will give this a wow factor. One is, depending on what designer you have, and all of these design periods have potential for this, you could grab some of the graphics and bring them in. So for example, this line is directly from this. And it just gave it a little bit of a style. This circle with a line coming out of it, I found in this piece of art over here. So I duplicated that. I duplicated these lines down here. There's the circle and the line. And then just a red square because he was really into those kind of geometry. And it seemed very final, almost like the period at the end, especially when his typeface has little squares and there's a square here. So that's a wow factor. The other thing is that because you don't have a lot of copy, you can actually lay this out with columns. Now, our Bauhaus zine had like 16 or 1800 word count. So that's not a lot of room for moving things around. But this one does have some space. So what you can do is go to pages. Now, if you want to put a column layout for all of the inside pages and you haven't done it yet, just go select all those pages by holding the shift key. Go to layout, margins and columns, and create a column layout just like we did for the Knoll brochure. So in this one I decided on 6. Initially I had 3, but then I realized it kind of didn't give me options for splitting areas. So I changed it to 6, and then my gutter is 0.125, which is really important. So everything in this brochure, even this chair, do you see how I lined it up with that line and I lined it up with this line? Both of these, even the artwork on this magazine. So now if you look at it, you can't tell that that's all dialed in like that, but it gives it a certain order and rhythm. Even my lines, I put those at 3 in. This is a 3-column block of text. This is 2 3-column blocks of text. What I did to create that was I just went to Object, Text Frame option. I created 2 columns, and remember I said the gutter is important on your column layout? That's because you want to match it here. So you can see, look in the preview, if you see if I make this gutter wider, it doesn't actually match the layout. So it has to be the same, and that's 0.125. Once I've given myself these columns, that I have a 6-column layout on every page, that gives me kind of a place to go. Both of these blocks of text are 5 columns. So I varied my column width. This one is 3. This one is 4. And that kind of keeps it interesting. It keeps it from feeling too much like a textbook. You know, you want this to be a little bit more fun because it's a zine. This one is 4 columns wide. So having that columns there works really well. The other thing you can do to kind of create impact is if you dive into the artist or period that you're working on, are there some good quotes? Maybe you could put inset copy. So maybe a piece like this chair, I could create a little inset here that talks about when this chair was designed and what it's called. And then I would come up with a style for this. So maybe this is 9 point and it's italic, light italic, and this is really tight letting. In fact, maybe it's 8. So that could give it kind of an interesting look too. And it's always nice to kind of read about certain pieces of art. So you can put quotes, you can reproduce pieces of the art, you can use inset copy, mix it up, dive in and really show us who this artist is or what this period is about and get into it. All right, I can't wait to see what you come up with.